Only in Russia can a math genius be a national hero, but still, they can't honor his simple request, leave him alone. That line stayed with me, because behind him is a story that didn't begin with a speech or an award, but with silence. At an award ceremony in Madrid, the room was full. World-class mathematicians had gathered, a gold medal had been polished, and the chair at the front sat waiting. Not just any chair. This one was reserved for the person who had solved a century-old mystery. But that chair remained empty. No one walked onto the stage, just a quiet refusal that echoed louder than applause ever could. A few years earlier, someone had posted a dense, nearly 1,000-page proof on an obscure website. It took the world 3 years to understand what it meant. And when they finally did, they realized one of the hardest problems in all of mathematics had been solved. The prize was $1 million. He didn't even pause to consider it. When a journalist finally reached him by phone, all he said was, "You are disturbing me. I am picking mushrooms." His name was Grigori Perelman. In mathematics, some problems aren't just hard, they are untouchable. You try, you fail, eventually you stop asking. But Perelman didn't stop. This was a problem that had survived for a century, one of the 7 Millennium Problems, and many believed it might never be solved at all. It was first proposed by the French mathematician Henri Poincaré in the early 19th, and it came from a branch of mathematics called topology. Topology studies shapes, but not in the way geometry does. It doesn't care about straight lines, angles, or perfect circles. It asks, what is the shape deep down? In topology, you can twist, stretch, bend. Just don't tear or glue. And if two shapes can be reshaped into each other like that, they are considered the same. For example, if you take a cube made of soft clay and roll it gently in your hands, you can turn it into a sphere. In topological terms, they are the same. But now take that sphere and poke a hole through it. Stretch it into a ring, a donut. That's called a torus, and that hole changes everything. You can't just squash that donut back into a ball without sealing the hole, and sealing is not allowed. No cutting, no gluing. So the number of holes becomes a kind of fingerprint, a way to tell one shape from another in the world of topology. That's the heart of the Poincaré Conjecture. He asked, if a three-dimensional space has no holes and it's finite, can it always be reshaped into a three-dimensional sphere? Not just the surface of a ball, but the full volume inside it. The kind of space you could actually live in. It sounds almost obvious, but proving it turned out to be a nightmare. In his book, The Poincaré Conjecture, author Donald O'Shea describes how this seemingly simple idea turned into a century-long battle. Versions of the conjecture were solved in 4 dimensions, 5, even higher. But in 3 dimensions, the one we live in, it remained out of reach. And that's what makes what Perelman did so astonishing. While the world was still puzzling over the Poincaré Conjecture, Perelman was quietly working, not just on the problem itself, but on how to even approach it. He wasn't the first to try, and he knew that. In fact, there was one mathematician whose work had opened the door decades earlier, Richard Hamilton. Hamilton had developed something called Ricci flow, a method of smoothing out of the shape of the space over time, almost like heat spreading evenly across the surface of an object. Imagine a bumpy, wrinkled balloon. Ricci flow tries to smooth it to make the shape more uniform, more understandable. Hamilton believed this method might hold the key to the Poincaré Conjecture, and for years he chased it. But Ricci flow had a flaw. In certain places, instead of smoothing, the space would pinch, forming long thin necks that threatened to collapse the whole structure. That's where Hamilton got stuck. And that's where Perelman picked up the thread. He studied Hamilton's work deeply and respected it. When Perelman finally released his own solution, he mentioned Hamilton by name again and again, giving full credit for laying the groundwork. But what Perelman did was different. He introduced a new mathematical technique called surgery, a way to cut away those unstable necks before they collapsed, and then let the Ricci flow continue. It's like removing a diseased branch from a tree, so the rest can keep growing. Using this approach, Perelman showed that any complex 3D space, no matter how tangled, could be smoothed, cleaned up, and ultimately simplified into one of a few fundamental forms. And one of those forms, a three-dimensional sphere. In other words, if a shape has no hole, it's a sphere, just like Poincare had suspected. for nearly 100 years before. And then came Perelman's next surprise. He didn't go to any conference or university. Instead, he uploaded 3 long papers, the first just 39 pages, to an open access site called Archive. No announcements, no interviews, just a few quiet emails to colleagues. You might want to look at this. Why? Because Perelman didn't trust the formal academic system. To him, journals were no longer guardians of knowledge, they were gatekeepers. If the proof is correct, he once said, there is no need for other recognition. For the next 3 years, a team of the mathematicians across the world studied Perelman's work line by line. They checked every calculation, filled in technical details, they tested the logic, the assumptions, the flow, and in the end, they agreed.
He was right. The great question has been answered.
He was right, but just as the community prepared to celebrate, a new controversy erupted. 2 mathematicians in China, Zhao and Zhu, released a paper of their own. They claimed they had solved the Poincaré Conjecture independently.
We are proud to present our solution to the Poincaré Conjecture, a crowning achievement in topology.
But the crown had already been placed, and their work leaned heavily on Perelman's papers. What stung wasn't the overlap, it was the omission. They used his insights, his methods, but failed to give him proper credit. The math community pushed back loudly. Long before the world even knew his name, Grigori Perelman was just a quiet boy in Leningrad in the former Soviet Union. He didn't talk much, he barely smiled. He was never distracted like the other children, he just listened. His classmates would rush to lunch. Perelman wouldn't eat, he just sat at his desk, staring at problems, solving them in silence. From an early age it was clear, this boy wasn't just smart, he was different. At 16, he represented the Soviet Union in the International Mathematical Olympiad and won a gold medal with a perfect score. That score changed everything. At the time, many universities in the Soviet Union had unofficial quotas that limited how many Jewish students could be accepted. But Olympiad winners were given a pass, and Perelman got in without needing to take entrance exams. He studied at Leningrad State University, and later moved to the prestigious Steklov Mathematical Institute. His reputation grew fast. Soon, mathematicians from the United States began to notice him. He gave lectures in New York, joined research at Stony Brook University, and later received a prestigious Miller Fellowship at UC Berkeley in California. While other researchers focused on publishing and networking, Perelman walked for hours across New York just to buy black bread from a Russian store he liked. And when some of the world's top universities came knocking, Princeton, Stanford, even Tel Aviv University, where his sister was studying, they all heard the same answer: no. In 2006, the Fields Medal, considered the highest honor in mathematics, was awarded to Perelman. It was the equivalent of the Nobel Prize for mathematicians, a moment of global recognition, typically delivered on a stage surrounded by applause and cameras. Perelman's name was included in the official announcements, and the seat was reserved for him at the ceremony in Madrid. But when the time came, he wasn't there to receive it. He had declined the award.
A Fields Medal is awarded to Grigori Perelman. I regret that Dr. Perelman has declined to accept the medal.
His decision puzzled the entire academic world. He didn't submit a public statement, but when asked later by the reporters, he offered a glimpse into his thinking. I do not think anything I say can be one of the slightest public interest. I'm not interested in money or fame. I don't want to be on display like an animal in zoo. That was Perelman, direct, honest, and uninterested in performance. 4 years later, in 2010, the Clay Mathematics Institute officially confirmed that he had solved the Poincaré Conjecture. With that recognition came the Millennium Prize, $1 million. Many assumed he would finally accept. After all, by then, he was no longer working. He lived in a modest apartment in St. Petersburg with his mother, surviving on very little. But again, he refused. Even so, some still hoped to change his mind. Sir John Ball, president of International Mathematical Union, flew to Russia personally to speak with him. For 2 days, through cold rain and quiet walks, the two men talked, nearly 10 hours in total. Ball tried to persuade him to accept the prize, or at least allow his name to be honored formally, but he declined again. And this time it seemed final. The same year he also resigned from his position at the Steklov Institute. According to those close to him, he told the director, "I have nothing against the people here, but I have no friends. I am disappointed in mathematics. I want to try something else." He had solved the unsolvable and then chosen to disappear. And just like that, he stepped away. After stepping away from mathematics, Perelman disappeared from the public eye almost entirely. He stopped speaking to nearly everyone. Journalists tried to find him. Some knocked on his apartment door in St. Petersburg. Others called through all university contacts, but no one got far. One reporter managed to reach him by phone, only to hear him say, "You are disturbing me. I am picking mushrooms." In 2014, a rumor surfaced that he moved to Sweden to work on nanotechnology. Soon after, he was seen again in St. Petersburg, walking fast through the streets and avoiding cameras. He once told a colleague that he left mathematics not because of the subject itself, but because of the people around it. He was deeply disappointed by the culture, the jealousy, the ego, the politics.
Привет, мама.
Maybe his journey wasn't just about solving a conjecture, but about living with clarity and on his own terms. In the end, he gave the world a solution that only a few could truly understand. In a world obsessed with being seen, Grigori Perelman chose to disappear. In a system built on recognition, he asked for none. In a profession where every step forward is rewarded, he took the biggest step of all and walked away. Most people will never understand the proof he gave, but maybe that doesn't matter, because in the end, maybe he saw something deeper. Maybe, just like Poincaré imagined the shape of space, Perelman imagined a different shape for life. And while the world may never hear from him again, his silence echoes as one of the most extraordinary answers ever given to a question no one else could solve.
I regret that Dr. Perelman has declined to accept the medal.